For only the third time in U.S. history, it's here, a president facing an impeachment trial.
This is about the Constitution of the United States, and it's important for the president to know, and Putin to know, the American voters in America should decide who our president is, not Vladimir Putin in Russia.
Nancy Pelosi, in the end, opting to trigger the trial sooner rather than later. The Democratic Speaker of the House of Representatives cutting short a drawn-out battle with Republicans over the rules of the Senate trial. Still, though, keeping up the pressure with the release of new evidence of Donald Trump's active bid to pressure Ukraine into digging up political dirt on his top rival for re-election, Joe Biden. While it's a near certainty that two-thirds of senators are not going to agree to make Trump the first ever sitting U.S. president to be removed from office, it's really anyone's guess how the upcoming weeks will play out in the court of public opinion, not only for Trump and the Republicans, but also for Joe Biden, whose son's seat on the board of a Ukrainian gas company will be coming under scrutiny, and three other Democratic candidates that include top contenders Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. For the next however many weeks, they won't be on the campaign trail. Instead, they'll be jurors in the only business that'll be on the Senate's agenda, a trial that could well clash with the first caucuses and primaries of the 2020 race. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at what Trump on trial will look like. Former Illinois Republican Party Chair Pat Brady joins us from Chicago. Welcome to the show.
Good evening. Glad to be here.
From New York City, Ian Reifovitz, who teaches at Empire State College, the author of The Tribalization of Politics, How Rush Limbaugh's Race-Baiting Rhetoric on the Obama Presidency Paved the Way for Trump. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me here.
Attorney Joe Smallhoover, member of Democrats Abroad here in Paris. Thank you for being with us.
Happy to be here.
And Gérald Olivier, the editor of the France Amérique blog, a columnist for Atlantico.fr. Bonne année. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Thanks for having me.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, after impeachment comes the impeachment trial. Emerald Maxwell has more.
Clearing the way for Donald Trump's impeachment trial to begin in the Senate. Speaker Nancy Pelosi presented the 7 managers she'd chosen to lead the prosecution of the US president for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Among them are House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler and House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff, 2 of the lead investigators in the inquiry against Trump.
The emphasis is making the strongest possible case to protect and defend our Constitution, to seek the truth for the American people. I'm very proud and honored that these 7 members, distinguished members, have accepted this serious responsibility.
The managers are tasked with marching the impeachment articles across the Capitol to the Senate chamber. Chief Justice John Roberts will then be sworn in to preside over the trial and will administer an oath to all 100 senators, requiring them to do impartial justice. The senators' first job will be deciding on the rules of the trial, including whether and when witnesses can be called. Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is arguing, though, that it's too early to invite witnesses and that he plans to follow the Senate's procedure in the 1999 impeachment trial of Bill Clinton.
I think we'll be dealing with the witness issue at the appropriate time into the trial. And I think it's certainly appropriate to point out that both sides would want to call witnesses that they wanted to hear from.
The ball is in McConnell's court, as he already has the simple majority he needs in the Republican-controlled chamber to agree to the terms. He wants to wrap this step up quickly so that the actual trial can start next Tuesday.
Joe Smallhoover, what are you expecting from that Senate trial?
Well, it will certainly be very interesting. I think, as you said in the introduction, with a solid Republican majority in the Senate, it's very difficult to expect that they will actually remove the president from office. But they're certainly going to carry a significant message, not simply to this president, but to all future presidents, about the scope and responsibilities of the president and what is and or is not acceptable, and will also have an effect on the primaries and the general election.
Was Nancy Pelosi right to trigger the articles of impeachment? She could have let it, because they hadn't get her way in that negotiation with the Senate on the rules of the actual trial. She could have sat on the articles of impeachment until the summer even.
Well, I think she made the right choice to do it now. There's no reason. Maybe she could have waited another week or two to see how the whole Lev Parnas thing plays out. But the reality is that the American people deserve to hear all of the facts before the Senate. We need to have a real trial with real witnesses, and time to do it now rather than later. To hold it out and like a sort of Damocles over the president was also not a good thing, neither for the president, of course, but for the Republic. Let's get this thing over with, but let's have a thorough and complete trial.
What kind of a trial would you like to see, Pat Brady? Should the Senate Majority Leader call witnesses?
Yeah, if they're going to do that, they got to call them on both sides. And if the Democrats have certain witnesses they want to have called, they should be allowed to do it. But so should the Republicans. But the reality is, this will be the third or fourth iteration of facts that we've already known, and it hasn't moved the political needle at all. And I thought from the beginning that initiating impeachment proceedings this close to an election was a huge political mistake. Americans do not like impeachment. When Bill Clinton was, the articles were voted on him 20-some years ago, he had a 58% approval rating. In the states when we've tried this, state next to me, Wisconsin, when they tried to do recall, it didn't work. And Scott Walker, the governor, won re-election. It's very politically risky. The Democrats didn't make their case in the court of public opinion before Christmas. And I'm not sure how much attention Americans are really paying to this trial. And when he's acquitted, which he will be, Trump's going to be able to say, hey, see, I'm not guilty. I was fine. We had a trial and I'm not guilty. So I just think it's been a political mistake to do this by the Democrats.
Now, the argument put forth, and it was mentioned a moment ago by Joe Smallhoover, Joe Smallhoover, thank you, was that there is fresh evidence coming out. On the eve of the House's handover to the Senate, we had the House of Representatives going public with exchanges between the president's personal lawyer, Rudolph Giuliani, and handlers that include Ukrainian-born middleman Lev Parnas, who's now under indictment for campaign finance violations. The House Intelligence Committee Chair Adam Schiff has been vocal about this, showing, among other things, that those moves to oust the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and handwritten notes by Parnas on stationery from the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Vienna that include this one: get Zelensky to announce the Biden case will be investigating, start communicating with President Zelensky, or without Pinchuk and Komolyovsky. Those are two Ukrainian oligarchs with influence. When you see these kinds of documents come out, Pat Brady, do you want to know more?
Sure, but I'm just talking in the court of public opinion. I think the public polling will tell you that most people believe that the president did what he was accused of doing, that he did use his position to exert this influence to help himself politically. But they've made a calculation, right or wrong, agree or disagree, that that's not something they want this president removed for 10 months from an election. And of all the impeachments that we've had, this is the first one we've had that's maybe Johnson, that is a first term. So I think that in the court of public opinion, and I agree, by acquitting him, we're setting a terrible standard for future presidents that this kind of behavior is acceptable, and it could be a long-term damage to the republic. But the Democrats, in doing it the way they did, slow rolling it out 3 or 4 times over mostly the same facts, it just hasn't moved the ball in terms of public opinion. And we got to remember, this is a political, not legal process.
Ian Reifovitz, do you agree?
Well, no, actually. If you look at, and if we want to talk about polling for impeachment and removal, for example, of Richard Nixon was in the 20s until just before he resigned, when information broke about the 19 minutes of missing, tape from the White House tapes. Impeachment for Bill Clinton, support for impeaching and removing Bill Clinton never broke above the same level, 25-ish, high 20s. The fact is that if you look at the polling right now, about 50% of Americans support impeaching and removing the president of the United States, almost double the levels reached prior, at a similar point, in the Clinton or Nixon cases. It's about 50-ish support impeachment and removal, 45-ish do not, and then the rest don't know. That is a significantly higher level than we've ever reached before, and anything anything close to that was reached during the Clinton campaign, Clinton impeachment and trials. Excuse me on that. So that's a significant thing. We have more information coming out, A. B, we have information that did not come out in the House trial because the president obstructed it. We have testimony that is desired from people like John Bolton, from people like Mick Mulvaney, and others. The president is not allowing them to testify. So that is potentially new information that can come into play in a Senate trial. So that is worth doing. And then finally, on the other point, we can talk about Democratic witnesses, Republican witnesses. But this is a trial about the conduct of Donald Trump. From a legal perspective, and I'm not a lawyer, nothing that Hunter Biden did has any impact on the conduct of Donald Trump. Hunter Biden is there's no evidence that Hunter Biden did anything wrong. There's no evidence that Joe Biden did anything wrong. But even if they did do something wrong, the president of the United States looking to get another foreign government to not investigate corruption in Ukraine in general, but to investigate corruption of one person and one family who happens to be a political opponent, that's abuse of power. So I don't see what Hunter Biden or Joe Biden could possibly add to this trial since they didn't witness anything Donald Trump did, and it's a trial of Donald Trump, not the Biden.
Ian, pick your druthers. Would you rather have no witnesses at all, or Mitch McConnell saying yes to the likes of John Bolton, Rudolph Giuliani, appearing as witnesses alongside the Bidens?
My druthers, certainly I would rather have all the witnesses than none, because, as I said, we know at least all these months and years, there's no evidence that the Bidens did anything wrong. So Trump has already been saying for months, oh, the Bidens are corrupt, the Bidens are corrupt. So they can testify. There won't be any evidence presented of their corruption. And the American people should be inured to the idea that the Bidens have done anything wrong. So if that's the price that we have to pay to get the witnesses that did see what Donald Trump did, that's a path I'm willing to go if anybody's asking me about my druthers, which I guess you just did.
Okay. Let's turn to the Frenchman in the room here. Gérald Olivier, how much do the French understand what's going on?
Oh, very little. Let's be honest. They do try to follow, but it's way beyond their grasp. They like the theatrics of it. I think they follow the media, the trial by public opinion, inevitably, because they read about it in the media. I don't think they understand the fact that a president can be impeached, but yet still be president. That two-phase process where the House votes first to actually impeach the president, but then the case goes to the Senate, and it's the Senate that actually convicts or not. And if the Senate fails to convict, then it's as if nothing had actually happened, or not, if you believe what the Democrats tell you, that he'll be impeached forever. But that he can be impeached, yet stay in power, then be put on trial, the president being put on trial, and then acquitted, and then staying or remaining as president or being removed. It's a little bit complex for the French public to understand. What they do understand is that this is politics. And I'm not sure that they give as much credence that Democrats think to the actual articles of impeachment. And in that sense, I do share what Pat Brady was saying, both about Americans and maybe other public watching that, is that from a constitutional point of view, if impeachment is justified by treason and bribery or high crimes and misdemeanors, as they call it, or as it's written in the text of the Constitution, whatever Trump did does not constitute any of this and does not justify
what does it say
a trial
about
on impeachment.
What does it say about a world where we think it's just the way it is when a U.S. president leans on his Ukrainian counterpart?
I'm not sure that, good question. But isn't that the way it always takes place?
Are morals slipping worldwide?
No, I don't think so at all. I think there was an opposition to Donald Trump. This impeachment did not begin with that phone call between Trump and President Zelensky. We know it began before. There has been an attempt by the Democrats to nullify the 2016 election. Some of them were very open about it. The day after the election, the day after his inauguration, they were saying, we're going to start writing articles of impeachment. The phone call is a pretext to reach the end of that process. I'm afraid the Democrats are in for a major disappointment because they're not going to get the result they expect, neither from the Senate nor from public opinion.
All right. This is, by the way, images of that formal vote to send those articles of impeachment to the Senate. As you can see, it's straight along partisan lines. Is it all going according to script?
I don't think so. And that's why Nancy Pelosi was sitting on those articles. Because you have to wonder why a process that was rushed through to the point of being today in a situation where they're bringing in new evidence. Well, if they needed new evidence, why did they already write the articles? If they're not finished with the investigation, why are we where we are? So the process was rushed through to be done before Christmas. And then for 4 weeks, we delay sending the articles to the Senate. What's the point? Either there's a rush or there's no rush.
The delay is simple. The delay is called Christmas holiday. And in fact, frankly, I'm surprised that we're even doing this before the Super Bowl because no one in America is paying attention to anything of this sort. But I don't think that I think you're wrong about the question about the evidence. The House had as much of the evidence on these two articles of impeachment as they could get, and they can't get any more because the president is in fact in contempt of Congress and refusing to allow the rest of the evidence to come forward. If we had had that evidence, maybe the result would have been different. But right now, the president, and this is I am very worried about the first article, which has to do with the corrupt attempt of this president to influence and to use a foreign power to influence the election for 2020. I am much more concerned about the second article, which is the contempt of Congress. Under the Constitution, the president is responsible to the Congress. The House and Senate have the absolute right to supervise what he is doing. Yeah. And by refusing to cooperate, even Nixon cooperated in the end, reluctantly. But
whether or not it's a constitutional crisis, we'll pick up on that point when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're speaking on what is being billed by social media as Impeachment Day. The House of Representatives voting to hand those articles of impeachment over to the Senate. That'll put the lawmakers there under lockdown for a trial that will last however many weeks, starting perhaps next Tuesday. With us to talk about it, Attorney Joe Smallhoover, member of Democrats Abroad. We're with former Illinois Republican Party Chair Pat Brady, who joins us from Chicago. Ian Reifovitz is in New York City, the author of The Tribalization of Power, How Rush Limbaugh's Race-Baiting Rhetoric on the Obama Presidency Paved the Way for Trump. And welcome back as well to Gérald Olivier, columnist at Atlantico.fr, and the man you can blame for the France Amérique blog. Welcome back. We're talking about now we're going to see the United States Senate effectively scrapping all other order of business. It's only the third time that there will be an impeachment trial for a U.S. president. The last one was more than 20 years ago. How it will play out with Trump is anyone's guess. Monty Francis has more.
Before Trump, only 3 U.S. presidents have faced articles of impeachment: Andrew Johnson, Richard Nixon, and Bill Clinton. But only Johnson and Clinton were actually impeached. The U.S. Constitution says presidents can be impeached for treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. The House of Representatives has the power to impeach the president, and the Senate, in a separate process, then decides whether to remove that president from office. Andrew Johnson, the 17th U.S. president and a Democrat, was impeached in 1868 for firing a cabinet member without the approval of the Senate, which was against the law at the time. The Senate did not remove him from office.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Bill Clinton was impeached in 1998, stemming from a deposition he gave in which he falsely claimed that he didn't have a sexual relationship with White House intern Monica Lewinsky. Articles of impeachment included lying under oath and obstructing justice. The Senate did not have the 2/3 majority necessary to remove him from office.
Those are matters in which the
Congress drafted articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon in 1973 in the wake of the Watergate scandal, including obstructing the investigation of his administration. But he resigned before there was a vote in the House.
And we are going to, as we look ahead to that trial, Pat Brady, I can recall that both with Richard Nixon, because I have enough gray hair, and with Bill Clinton, that, well, the entire nation held its breath in both cases. What's it going to be like this time around?
Well, you don't have as much gray hair as me, and I do remember watching the Nixon proceedings, and the country was fixated on it. And the way it kind of rolled out kept the country's attention because it was bit by bit. And every new revelation, there were some really bad conduct there done by Nixon and the people around him. And it was the first time in American history that the Americans didn't trust their government. This comes right after Vietnam, so a very traumatic time here. I think the Trump impeachment's more like the Bill Clinton impeachment, although it's different in process. But the difference here is this is the third or fourth investigation or hearing we've had into President Trump, starting with the Mueller investigation. And as was mentioned earlier, this has been going on for a long, long time. And as I said earlier, the American public does not like impeachment. They do not like their elected officials changing the results of election. History will tell you that. And in this case, I think there's been so much of it, the country is tuned out. Since he's been impeached in the House, we got into a shooting war with Iran, a lot of new economic numbers out. The trade deal with China that they're signing today are moving forward today. So there are a lot of things going on that the Americans care more about, in my opinion, than this impeachment trial, where we're going to hear the same evidence that we've heard already 2 or 3 times before.
Ian Reifovitz, you agree that people won't be riveted to their television sets or taking sick days to watch the proceedings?
Yeah, I can't see a lot of people taking sick days to watch the proceedings. That might be beyond the level that we're talking about. But it is something that shows up in polling when they ask respondents, what are the most important things in terms of how you're going to judge a political candidate. And actually, people on both sides say impeachment. It actually comes out a little higher on the Republican side. Republican voters are more interested in their candidate supporting President Trump than even Democratic voters are in their candidates pushing for impeachment or removal. So I don't think it's going to change a lot of minds, but we'll have to see. And I think a lot depends on if and what new information comes out in the trial in the Senate.
Let me interrupt you on that, Ian, because the White House has put out a statement saying it does not believe the Senate needs to call any witnesses. An official quoted by the Reuters news agency saying it would be extraordinarily unlikely the trial would last more than 2 weeks. Your reaction? Well,
for weeks before today, the president talked about wanting to call lots of witnesses and wanting a full trial where all the information could be discussed and imposed and that he could be vindicated. So he appears to have flip-flopped on this, although President Trump has gone back and forth on so many things, it's hard to keep track. Look, I think the witnesses matter. If John Bolton comes in and says, I saw President Trump do X, Y, and Z and tell Giuliani this or that, or if Mick Mulvaney says, look, the president ordered me to do this or that, to hold the aid, and he said, we're going to get Biden. I mean, these are things that could come out that haven't yet come out. I don't know that they would be enough to move enough Republicans to convict. And the reason for that is, honestly, there aren't enough principled Republicans in the Senate. There really just aren't. There are between 4 and 6 people who are at least open-minded enough maybe to support the calling of witnesses. But for the rest of them, you probably saw the quote from former Republican Senator Jeff Flake, who said, look, I'm in touch with my colleagues. If there was a secret vote, you'd get enough votes to probably convict and remove. You get 20 to 30 Republicans to convict or remove. But in public trial, in a public vote, that's not going to happen because they're afraid of Donald Trump and they're afraid of Republican primary voters. And that's the sad reality where we are with the Republican Party today. And that's the most important reason why you won't have a conviction, even if there is more evidence that really implicates even worse wrongdoing than we already know about.
Gérald Olivier, do you get the sense that, well, both sides have made their point and that a short trial is in the interest of both camps?
I think at this stage it's in the interest of Donald Trump and probably in the interest of the Republicans. I'm not sure that's what the Democrats want. The Democrats want to maintain the pressure for as long as possible, and so they're going to try and make this trial as long as possible. The only two victims, or three, would be the three senators that are running for president, but because they're going to have to be sitting there doing nothing, listening to those things all day, not even being able to
The Iowa
speak.
caucuses are February 3rd.
Correct.
So you have Bernie Sanders surging. He's not going to be out on the campaign trail.
No, he won't. Neither will Elizabeth Warren. And there were the two main actors in the debate last night, the final debate that the Democrats had before that first
or Minnesota
caucus.
Senator A.B. Klobuchar.
So I think the Republicans want to get it over with because they know the outcome. And that's why the White House is insisting on no witnesses. And if you have no witnesses, it could last for just about 2 weeks because you're going to have opening arguments and each side is going to present their case. The Democrat side, we've heard because we've had the House already on TV. We've followed all of those investigations and so forth. We'll have the other side's case. And then at the end, the Senate will debate to allow or not allow witnesses. If they don't allow witnesses, you have closing argument and they vote. And they vote not to convict. So it's over. And I think at this stage, Republicans want to get this over with because they know that they can then have a no conviction instead of not having an impeached president.
Joe Smallhofer, the idea of a Senate impeachment trial going on while you have the Iowa caucuses, while you have the New Hampshire primaries, while you have the possibly even beyond that, with the Super Tuesday on March the 3rd. I don't know if it'll last that long, but nonetheless, your thoughts on that is?
I think actually it's much more important that the trial go on. We need to get to the bottom of this. That this will affect the Democratic primary to a certain extent is a minor thing compared to the
Could it change the race, though?
Could
it change the race?
The race for the Democratic primary?
Yeah.
Probably not. Not unless one of the candidates were to come out and say something truly insane. But I don't believe that that's going to have a major effect. The only real effect it will have is it will have some effect on the organizing and the campaigning. But in fact, for instance, in Iowa, it's a ground game. The teams are already formed. They're already out canvassing. They're already out. It may have an effect.
But could those three senators, for instance, take part in a debate if there's a debate?
Yes, yeah, because the debate is not going to take place unless the Senate decides to go from 9 o'clock in the morning until midnight. If there's a debate, it will be in the evening, and those senators will be present. It may have an effect on the Democrats abroad primary on March 3rd, but is it going to have an effect finally on the thing at the end? I don't think so. I think the effect there will be relatively minor. It will, however, have a big effect on the election in November.
Yeah, and the election's all the way in November. Again, we're in this crucial moment for the Democrats right now. Joe Biden's in the lead. 3 other candidates are close enough in early voting states with, as we said, Bernie Sanders surging. He denies, by the way, we saw some theatrics on Tuesday night in a debate in Iowa. He denies telling fellow senator and rival Elizabeth Warren that a woman can't be elected. She then appeared to snub a handshake when they exchanged at the close of Tuesday's debate in Des Moines.
Anybody knows me knows that it's incomprehensible that I would think that a woman could not be president of the United States. Go to YouTube today. There's a video of me 30 years ago talking about how a woman could become president of the United States.
The best way to talk about who can win is by looking at people's winning record. So, can a woman beat Donald Trump? Look at the men on this stage. Collectively, they have lost 10 elections. The only people on this stage who have won every single election that they've been in are the women.
Ian Reifovitz, those clips have been playing over and over since Tuesday's debate. Again, with the optics now of impeachment, does it sort of change the way you look at the candidates in terms of, does it help or hurt these Democratic candidates?
Well, I think this spat I think it's probably something that plays to the sort of true believers for each of those two candidates. And I think it's something new that the media can get excited about, because otherwise it's the same, debate over healthcare and donors that we've had for 8 or 9 months. So it's a shiny new toy for everybody, to jump up about. Look, it does play into some of the tropes from 2016. There were the Bernie Sanders camp was criticized on gender issues, and Hillary Clinton, to some degree in the Democratic primary, ran as as the standard bearer of women. So I think Democrats hoped to stay away from that in 2020, and they thought that maybe by the fact that there were multiple women on the stage who are all serious candidates, top-tier candidates, that you wouldn't have that kind of gender issue play out. With Kamala Harris dropping out, now you're down to 2 women and only really one who's a top-level frontrunner. It's a shame, I think, for the Democrats that this had to come together this way. In the end, I don't think a lot of voters are going to make their decision based on whether they thought Bernie Sanders said something in a private conversation with Elizabeth Warren or didn't say that something. We're 2.5 weeks out. I think this will largely have blown over by the time we get to February 3rd, when the Iowa caucuses take
It's a
place.
very open race. Will the impeachment trial have an impact on who leads after the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary?
No, I don't think so. I think the impeachment it will have an important impact on the the general election. But no, I don't think it will have much of an impact on the Democratic race, unless somehow, some way, there's a negative impact on Joe Biden, which I don't expect there to be. There's been years now for anything real to come out about the Bidens. The Trump administration has been able to investigate all it wanted to about the Bidens. The whole point of the Zelensky call and the whole push was to be able to say, for Trump's camp, to be able to say, look, it's not just us saying that Biden needs to be investigated. He's actually under investigated by somebody independent from us. Of course, now we know that that Zelensky really wasn't independent from Trump. He was under Trump's thumb. But that's really the whole underlying theme here. So unless something really strange comes out about the Bidens, which I don't see, or unless obviously the worse information comes out about Trump, I certainly don't think it will affect the Democratic primary. But look, Donald Trump is impeached, and that will be a stain on his record. And even if he's not convicted, he will have been not convicted by a Republican majority. I don't think anybody is going to fail to recognize that it's Republicans saying he wasn't guilty. Maybe a few of them will say he's guilty, and you'll get a majority, a bipartisan majority, saying he's guilty. And even if he's not convicted, that is something.
Pat Brady, you agree that the Senate impeachment trial won't really impact much the Democratic primaries?
No, I agree. I completely agree. I think for the Democrats, I think it's a bad sign. They kind of have problems now, like the Republicans did 10 years ago. They've got the far, far left, way to the mainstream of America, fighting over these quasi-socialistic policies, all kinds of spending, all kinds of pie-in-the-sky proposals that just won't work. And that's the Sanders Warren wing. And if either of those two win the nomination, Donald Trump, I think, will easily be our next president. They're just not in the mainstream. The point being that the Democrats' problems, I think, are their own internal struggle. And I don't think what happens in the Senate is going to have any impact on their election.
But the Republicans used to be a bigger tent than they are today. Donald Trump doesn't have the problems the Democrats have because, there's really only one wing that has voice right now. That makes his job easier in the primaries. Will it make it harder in the general election?
It'll make it a lot harder. I've been saying this for 4 years, that the problem the president has right now is he hasn't expanded his base. Now you see in social media, they're talking about his big rally up in Wisconsin last night, that there were a lot of people there that weren't necessarily Republicans. And he did co-opt a good number of people that typically might vote Democratic, but he's still got that number in the low 40% of voters that support him. And I think his real problem, and I'm in the Chicago area, and I think this is similar in other large urban areas, he has a real problem with suburban women. They don't like his behavior. They may like some of his policies, but they don't like the behavior. So the test for him is going to be whether he can attract some of that vote back by pointing to maybe economic issues or maybe national defense issues. But I've said all along, too, that this election in November is solely going to be determined by who the Democrats nominate. And if they nominate a far left, quasi-socialist or socialist candidate, Donald Trump wins. If they elect somebody that can be attractive to those voters in 2016 that voted for Trump but regret it, then I think they'll be successful. But and even the most liberal commentators last night watching the debate were saying there was nothing on that stage last night to make them think that they can beat Donald Trump, at least not where we sit today.
You mentioned Donald Trump having to win back women voters. He weighed in that rally in swing state Wisconsin on the the spat that we talked about earlier between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
A woman can win for president. Fortunately, that could happen. That could happen. Who knows? But she said that Bernie said a woman can't win. I don't believe that Bernie said that. I really don't. So, you know, just know Bernie, it's not the kind of a thing he'd say.
Do you agree with what Pat Brady said, that Donald Trump does have a problem?
Not fully, to be honest with you. Because I do believe, and watching those rallies can help, I do believe that it's going to be very difficult for many Americans to vote against such a good economy come November. It's going to be difficult to vote against 3.5% unemployment, difficult to vote against new factories being built in Michigan, in the old Rust Belt. Whatever you think about Donald Trump, so far, he's been pretty successful at being president when it comes to benefiting the American economy and the average American's wallet. And for that reason, someone coming in with such a record has already a built-in advantage. That's the number one thing. Number two, Trump's crowds are very, very energized. And you can see that at those rallies.
But we saw in the midterms that the Democrats were energized too.
Were you energized by last night's debate? It was a snoozer, and they've always been snoozers. And I quite agree about what Pat Brady said regarding that no one yesterday on that stage, to me, could beat Donald Trump in November.
Joe Small?
It's a debate. They're all boring, all of them.
They're not boring.
The only debate that might possibly be interesting is the true debate between the candidates for the general election. In the primaries, those debates are always boring. Does anyone remember the Republican debates in 2016?
Yes.
No. Other than President 45 insulting all of his Republican candidates, no one remembers anything about those
Everybody
debates.
watched them. They had the highest rating of any debate.
The truth of the matter is that Mr. Trump has a serious problem. Remember, he didn't win the popular vote in 2016. He lost it by 3 million votes. The Republicans lost the midterm elections by 10 million votes. They have a real serious problem. He was right about the fact that the suburban America and urban America is not in favor of this president. They don't like what he's doing. They're really appalled. The soccer moms, a term we haven't been using for a while, but the soccer moms don't like it. My very sister, who's a relatively unpolitical person, now stands in front of her television and yells because what kind of example are you giving to my grandchildren? Right? They might be relatively happy, and they're not entirely happy with the economy because, in fact, half of the population isn't benefiting, and the rest, and another 3/4 of the population isn't benefiting from this economy. Not everyone has a stock portfolio, but what they really see is a president out of control, one policy after another. I mean, just the other day he tweeted a picture of snowfall in Washington on a day when it was 20 degrees Celsius in Washington. The Americans know that this White House lies every single time it opens its mouth.
But he gets your attention. Ian Reifovitz.
So what? He gets his attention. That's great, wonderful. Negative publicity does not help. If you have to go into the polling place and put an X beside his name, I'm thinking that people are going to wonder about that the next time, and they're going to say, "Nah, I can't do that. My grandchildren are not going to like this."
All right, Joe Smallhoover, I want to thank you. Thank you, Ian Reifovitz, for joining us from New York City. I want to thank Pat Brady for being with us from Chicago. Gérald Olivier, stay with us. Media Watch is next. All right, and we say hello to James Green. Here he is, James Creedon. How are you, sir?
Jingle arrived. I'm very well, thank you, Francois. Quick look at how some of this is playing out on the news websites in the US. A lot of focus now on the technicalities of what the process is going to be from next week. In the Senate, the fact that Speaker Pelosi named 7 impeachment managers who all had a very strong legal and law enforcement background. No surprise that she would be seeking out litigators for what is essentially a legal process. In impeachment parlance, they're known as managers, as this piece in BuzzFeed points out. They'll be tasked with convincing the 67 senators to convict him Trump and remove him from office. It's a dream team, according to Breitbart, who probably aren't relishing the process entirely, but very much a pro-conservative media. Also then looking at who will preside over it, because it's normally the Vice President who presides over the Senate. He'll, of course, have to step to one side because not exactly impartial in this case. And it's going to be the Chief Justice, John Roberts, who will be leaving, crossing First Street and just going basically over the road into Capitol Hill, leaving behind an institution, as this New York Times piece says, it prides itself on reason and decorum at the Supreme Court, and going over to the highly charged partisan warfare of the Senate. So all of those sort of who will be kind of overseeing the whole procedure is getting quite a bit of focus. This is an interesting piece in the LA Times by Doyle McManus. He's pointing out that the verdict, as we have been discussing, is pretty much foreordained, but that doesn't. That's not what this trial will be about. It's about politics, and he goes on then to talk about high politics and low politics. Republicans will say it's only politics. That's not true. Democrats will say it's not about politics, and that's not true either. And so he says, really, you're going to see high politics at play and low politics. The low politics, we know what it is. It's an election year, and this is just about, weakening your adversary by whatever means possible. But there is also high politics at play, the defence of the Constitution against a president who has claimed erroneously that Article 2 gives him the right to do whatever he wants. So that's the take on it in the LA Times by Doyle McManus.
Joe Smallhover, the Chief Justice, how much of a role will he play?
Well, unlike the system in France where there's an inquisitorial judge, the Chief Justice will be basically making decisions on procedural questions that arise, and he's not going to. He has no role in the decision making. He's only there to resolve disputes that arise between the parties during the event. It's important. And he pointed out that the decorum of the Supreme Court is an important counterbalance to the raucousness, particularly in the House, but also in the Senate, where they pretend that they're very collegial, but they can also get pretty raucous. So that's his role, is there to be an arbiter of those procedural decisions that need to be taken. Other than that, his role should be, at least constitutionally and according to the oath that he takes, relatively minor.
Relatively minor. Okay.
So a lot of people have been saying it's a scandal, of course, this impeachment process, those who are partisan and in favour of Donald Trump. But just to finish, one final detail in this LA Times opinion piece, it's an inevitable part of the way impeachment works, which is the Constitution is the only method of sanctioning a president for misconduct. So from his point of view, this crying of scandal and low politics and whatnot, it's just not true. There might be elements of low politics, but it is also about the dignity of the role of the presidency and protecting that.
All right, and both sides alluding to the 18th century founders of that of that document. Many thanks, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.